Hey everyone, and welcome to the next part of the training where we're going to be covering tracking smoothness. Of course, Seervision tracking is very smooth and works really well without needing to make too many adjustments. But if you do need to make some adjustments, you can adjust the smoothness of the tracking and also the deadband. So let's learn about what all of that means. I'm going to walk up to this trigger zone at the podium here. We'll start tracking and then we'll see how it's working and maybe make a few adjustments. So right away, we can see here in the Seervision user interface that smoothness is set to around half. What does that look like? Well, you can see that this lets me move around at a speed which is pretty appropriate for a presenter. So I can move here from left to right and nothing too dramatic is happening. The camera's not whipping around, and equally I can move fairly slowly and the camera's going to move quite nicely just to keep me in frame correctly. But of course, if I really wanted to, I could run away. And I've really moved too fast there for the camera to actually keep track of me, okay? So this is where we can adjust smoothness. Of course, typically you're not likely to be running away in the middle of a presentation unless the audience is, being really mean to you. But it's good to have these kind of controls. So firstly, let's have a look at this section. We've got pan smoothness and tilt smoothness. And normally when we're doing presenter tracking, we're most concerned with pan. So let's adjust that. Let's just turn that all the way down and see what the result is. Now with this setting turned all the way down to 0, we can see that even very small movements of the presenter result in a fairly significant move from the camera. It's really just trying to keep us perfectly centered in the frame as described by the tracking container. And this is not a particularly pleasant experience for the far end viewer. It's really quite jerky, and if the presenter is the kind of person who might say, hey, let's talk to these people over here, and now, do you know what, I'm going to come over here and talk to you guys, and maybe I'm just going to move from left to right like this, the camera's moving all over the place. On the other extreme, we can turn it all the way up to 1, okay? And now we can see that if I move, the camera is going to very slowly and gradually bring me back into the center. So it's still moving whenever I move, but it's going to do it in a much slower way, okay? So there's your two extremes. A very low tracking smoothness setting is going to mean the camera's very jerky, and here with the camera set to the maximum smoothness, even just walking at a normal speed, I'm almost able to move out of the frame. So let's just set this back to the middle, which to be honest, is a really good place to have tracking smoothness. It means you can move at the fastest speed you're likely to walk at when giving a presentation, but it also means that it's quite slow and graceful. However, we've still got a small issue, which is that any little movement, even me just leaning from side to side, is causing a camera movement. The smoothness is controlling whether it's fast or slow. But what if we don't want any movement until we start to walk in a significant way? This is where the deadband comes in. And the deadband is a feature of Seervision, which essentially means that the presenter can move within a certain range and not trigger any movement of the camera at all. Let's go ahead and turn on the deadband overlay with this button in the Seervision user interface. We're going to turn that on and we can see I've got a green box around my head. Now, the deadband's off right now, which means that as I move, we're going to see that camera move straight away. Let's turn on the deadband. We can see the box now goes into a filled in green, and now the presenter can move from side to side in this case, taking a step to talk to the audience over here, maybe over here. And it's only as they start to move out of that deadband, you see the little green dot representing my head on the edge of the deadband, that it brings us back into frame. The speed at which it does that is based on the tracking smoothness, but the deadband means that it doesn't do it until the presenter moves significantly away from wherever you set up the deadband. Now, the properties of the deadband are fully adjustable. We can increase its width and its height, and we can also move it around the screen. So we can move it from left to right here if we don't want to keep it in the center. Now, you can see if we set it up like this where it's fairly small, the presenter can still make small movements. It's when they make, a medium-sized movement like this that we get a response from the camera. On the opposite side of the scale, we could set this width to be really quite large so that it's almost covering the whole width of the frame. Now, this might be something you want if you don't want to really point out that we're tracking the presenter too much. You want to allow them to move around quite a long way. And in fact, I might bump that up even a little bit more. And no tracking really happens until they essentially start to leave the frame, at which point it brings them back in. Now, of course, the risk here is that they move too quickly and they can step out of the frame before the camera has time to react. But you could combine a large deadband with a very low pan smoothness. So if we turn pan smoothness all the way down, we're going to see the camera responds really quickly, but it will only respond when I start to leave the deadband. So now we can see that no tracking is really happening until I start to walk away, and it's going to respond quite quickly to bring me back into frame. Of course, the best settings are usually those in the middle, and I find that what works really well is a pan smoothness around here and maybe a deadband that covers this sort of range here. Lets the presenter move around, they can fidget a little bit and the camera's not going to move, but when they actually start to walk, that's when we have an adjustment to the camera. Now, before we move on, let's point out that deadband settings, along with lots of other tracking properties like tracking smoothness, can be saved as part of a container if you want to change them when different containers are recalled. Let's have a look at how that works. When editing any container, you can see all of the Seervision components contained within. Now, by default, this includes the transition speed, shot properties like the framing and the relative size, and whether tracking is engaged or not. But if we press the Add Component button, we get a complete list of every Seervision attribute that can be added to this container, including the deadband. We could also add tracking smoothness as a component inside of this container. Now, this means that the deadband and the tracking smoothness properties will get recalled when the container is recalled, overriding whatever's been set in the tracking settings panel. This means you can have different deadband and different smoothness settings for different containers, maybe to be used with different trigger zones. If you'd rather these settings be set globally, don't add them to the container, and Seervision will use whatever's set in the tracking settings panel.